Jazzcast Pros.
You may have seen this title and been like, Marshawn, you have a high vibe podcast, yet the last two have been a little, I don't want to say low vibe, but just like they have been a little more about the harder emotions that come with entrepreneurship. And so this is a topic that I plan to talk about. Like I just had this idea, I wrote it down, and I'm excited to get to today because I think it is something that we don't talk about a lot in entrepreneurship, and that is grief. Welcome to High Vibe Table Talks, the podcast to help you, the current or aspiring solopreneur, navigate the messy middle so you can make both an income and an impact. Hi, I'm Rashawn, and I love creating safe spaces for women to be courageous in their dreams. After spending a decade working in sales for a startup and talking with hundreds of other women entrepreneurs, I know it can be lonely, but you can do this. In society, we talk about grief a lot because it happens to us when we lose, our relationship, or someone in our family passes away, or, there are a lot of places in our life when grief happens, but it's a little bit different with entrepreneurship because it's just a little bit more ambiguous, I want to say. In a lot of episodes, we talk about relationships between two things that aren't two actual things. So like my relationship with no, my relationship with yes, my relationship with all these different sort of like emotions, and not necessarily people, places, things. They're more just like ideas. And I think that grief has a place in that as well. And so there are many places that grief shows up for us in entrepreneurship. And I want us to be able to say, to see it as an emotion, as a valid emotion, as part of the process, allow ourselves to feel it, allow ourselves to process it and work through it so that we can get to the other side and take the lessons that are in grief. I think as entrepreneurs, we just are like, okay, on to the next one. I have to keep going. I have to keep trying, keep doing, keep achieving. And when there is something that kind of knocks us off of our course, we want to just say, I'm going to keep working through it. And we don't allow ourselves the time to say wow, that sucked. Wow, that hurt. In last week's episode, I kind of talked about where I am and kind of that limbo space that I am in. It actually felt really good to talk through that. I had felt very, what's the word? I had felt very creatively blocked, and I woke up the next day after recording that oh, okay. I just getting it out felt so good. And I think that this episode is kind of a part two to that, where sometimes we need to call things for what they are. I'm grieving the loss of X, or this really hurt, or this was really hard for me, so that you can pull your lessons from it, work through it, listen to your emotions around it, and then work through it. So there are different types of grief that I think that we can have during entrepreneurship. The first one I want to talk about, because I think everybody has felt this, and I think that this is part of why groups like my mastermind, like my co-working sessions, like finding community is so important in entrepreneurship, is because I think that being an entrepreneur is a mindset that some people have and some people don't. As a society, we also like to feel safe and have a track, and entrepreneurship really bucks that thought and that track. And there are a lot of people out there too who have unrealized dreams. And when you talk about these things that you're doing, achieving, going after these ideas that you have, they may project their own insecurities onto you. And so the grief is in evolving relationships, changing relationships, understanding that the entrepreneur part of you is not safe in certain areas. And that is hard to come to terms with sometimes. for example, you may have this idea, we all have had like, oh, here's this business that I'm going to start. And then you bring it to someone and they're like, okay, well, what about this? What about the economy? How are you even going to get out there and sell it? What are you going to say when people do this? And they start peppering you with all of these questions or what ifs in the negative. Like, what if this turns out horribly? What if this is the worst idea ever? What if you crash and burn? As I said, sometimes this is like just a more realist perspective and like really trying to think through things A to Z, which I appreciate. And, the journey of an entrepreneur is taking those course corrections and so them not feeling like, well, I have the ability to work through those. And also some people are like, well, me telling you that I'm going after this idea that I'm very passionate about, and they have this little inkling of something that they've wanted to try for so long, and you doing it is a mirror to them that like you have this unrealized thing that you've never done. And it's a projection of their own insecurities, their own things that they're working through. Those are all changes in relationships that we are going to go through. And so having community of people who are doing or have done similar things to you, I think is really important, and understanding that those are safe spaces and accepting that there is grief in like, okay, that relationship is evolving. That relationship is changing. My best friend is not someone, and I'm not saying this in my life, but whoever you may bring it to is not a place I can share this part of my heart, of my journey. And letting go of that can be difficult. I don't want to say that anybody who critiques you or brings up things that could happen or, debates you in your ideas is bad or negative or shouldn't be trusted. There is a balance between, hey, I see you and I hear you, have you thought about this? Or, hey, I went through that and here was my experience with it. Here are some things to look out for or things to think about. Those are all like positive discussions to have, because while we are entrepreneurs and we're trying to like create something out of nothing, we're also not like reinventing the wheel. Like my sales course isn't information that I just like was sitting under a tree and like it magically popped in my head. Like you can find a lot of that sales information out in the world. Do I think I'm releasing it in a different way and connecting with people in a different way? Yes. But like none of it is necessarily reinventing the wheel. So other people may have experience in what you're doing. But it's not like a you should never because. And you'll feel the difference in those conversations and those discussions, especially the more that you have them. So area number one where we feel grief in entrepreneurship is evolving relationships. Place number two is ideas that we have. And so there are certain ones, and I have had so many of these, because one of the beautiful things about entrepreneurship is we're constantly coming up with new ideas. And whether they, get shot down early on or you have put a lot of time and effort into them and it just flops, there are some things that just don't work out. And it can be for a multitude of reasons. One example that I have talked about on the podcast before is there was this community that I wanted to build on a platform called Mighty Networks. I loved the idea so much. I bought a year membership to Mighty Networks and I had like just these really great plans, and I would go in there and I would sell people to come in, and then I would write stuff and try to engage, and I would run my masterminds through them. And it just ended up being so clunky, and I never really figured out the right formula for like what comes first, the chicken or the egg. Do I sell a bunch of people, get them on this platform that is kind of bare bones and then build it up? Do I build up a big library and then invite people? And it just was like one more app for a lot of my clients to get onto, and it just had so many barriers. And so at one point, someone in my community was like, I don't think this is serving you. Like, I think that it's a good idea in theory, but like execution and where you are, like I don't think it's the thing. And as soon as she said it, I like started crying because I was like, oh, you're so right. And I think part of the grief was letting it go. Part of the grief was all the time and effort that I had put into it, all the resources that I was like, this is the thing. The grief was around like, I had this target as what my energy is going towards. And now what my energy is going towards is I have no idea. And all of those wrapped together were like very intense emotions for me. And so we got, after I finished crying on the call, we got off the call and I sat and journaled and cried more. But there was a lot of like emotion and grief around like, this is the thing. And we have to be passionate and care deeply about those things. And we have to not hold them so tight that when it's time to let go, that we don't just like, how do I want to say this? We have to have a deep passion and a deep, like, this is my goal. This is what I want to do. And we can't have our head in the sand to say like, this is the only way, this is the only thing that will work. And I'm just going to keep going until it does. And just kind of that self-awareness of like, this isn't what I thought it was going to be when I started out. And so now that I'm here, I have to let go of that. And that can be hard. I only had less than 10 people in it. So it wasn't a huge letting go as far as like, it was bringing in all this money and now I'm going to be stepping away from that. It was more like, I thought this was the thing that was going to catapult my success and now it's not. And so that is one aspect, or that is one area that we can feel grief in, and kind of, using that as a tangent of place number 3 where we can feel grief is changing course when something is successful, but it doesn't serve us anymore. I kind of feel like I have been through this, but not to the point where I have seen others go through it. Like I was a part of a co-working group based out of Toronto, and they had to close their doors both to their online membership, but also their physical location. I kind of feel like this a little bit with my mastermind. It was something that I loved. It worked. It changed lives. I saw the impact it had on people, and I had to put it down for a different season of my life. The people who owned the Toronto-based co-working space, like it didn't serve them anymore to show up to those calls on that frequent of a basis. They needed it and everybody needed it during COVID and when we were all shut down, and it was such a beautiful space to be in. And then their life changed. A lot of entrepreneurs' lives changed. The world changed. And so they needed to pivot, and it didn't make sense for them to put all of their resources into that anymore. Sometimes it can be about the customer base and their needs changing. Sometimes it can be about the season of life that you're in. Part of why I am building this course and selling this course is because my season of life is so busy in the after school. We're starting to travel a lot more. I'm just really involved in the day-to-day of like our family stuff. And so I want to have freedom to not feel called to have calls with people every Monday and Friday. Do I think that I will have that season again? Absolutely. But I think that building this course is something that's really important to the season of life that I want to be in. And so it can be really difficult, and there is grief to saying this thing was so wonderful. You can also feel like that in changing careers. Like even if I think that there's grief in going from, you have a full-time job, you're running something as a side business, and when you leap from that full-time job to being an entrepreneur, there is grief in that. There is a loss of identity. You identified as an employee for so long, and now you're identifying as an entrepreneur. And there's so many emotions around like scared and excited and unknown. And but grief is in there as well. Like changing careers from being a teacher to working in sales, there was grief of like, I put so much time and had this identity of I'm a teacher, and I am saying goodbye to that for now. I don't think I'll ever get back into education as far as public school teacher ever again. But, I'm running a sales course. Part of that is teaching. And so it has definitely evolved throughout the years. But letting go of that and transitioning from employee to entrepreneur, grief is part of that package that comes with it. There's so much of it. And we have to know how to say, like, thank you for serving me. You are here. I feel you. And I'm going to like sit with these emotions. And then I'm going to like work through them. So changing course, whether you're putting down an idea that worked really well for you, saying goodbye to like something that you loved and was very impactful at one point, changing careers, those are all kind of like course corrections that we make in many different sizes throughout our journey as entrepreneurs. And understanding that grief is part of that, I think, is really important. And the last one, so time number 4, where we have grief, is in facing rejection. There are going to be a ton of no's along this process. I talk about this all the time when it comes to sales. Like, you have to get comfortable in hearing no. You have to have a certain armor up when it comes to hearing no, especially in the prospecting. Like, I talk about it a lot in prospecting as far as like, you're going to hear a lot of no's before you hear yes. As you get further down the funnel, and like, let's say you have a big deal that is about to close, you have a client who, everything feels like it's right, it's a good fit, you're charging what you're worth, and the client is an ideal client and has the budget for you, and like, it just feels like it's the right vibe for you two to work together. Those aren't always like, you're not going to sign 100% of those. You are going to hear no during those phases as well. They may just ghost you. They may have a personal emergency or whatever. Like, life is going to life for them as well. They may have been telling you they have that budget, or they may be telling you that they want to move forward with this soon, but that's not actually what's going on behind the scenes. And so all the way through the sales funnel, you are going to hear no, you're going to face rejection, you're going to have people who are going to not want to work with you. There's a couple things within there. Part of it is building up an armor and saying like, okay, I'm going to hear no. Like, when I was teaching, I taught in the city school district here, and one of my assignments was in like middle school, and that was always like, I was very intimidated when I first started, but then like I kind of got the hang of it. And one of my like mental switches was like, okay, I might get told to fuck off today and a desk thrown at me, but like, we're here. And so when those things didn't happen, I was like, that was a pretty good day. And so it's some of that of like stepping into like, I'm going to hear no, people are going to ghost me, and like mentally preparing for that and holding space for when it does happen to be like, that sucked. Like, that really sucked. And again, like when you're further down in the sales funnel, like wanting that so deeply, but also not having it completely destroy you if it doesn't happen. I think about this sometimes, like when we bought our house, like we put in a ton of offers on houses. We saw so many houses during the process, and you have to like see yourself in that house and envision your life being in that house. But also, if you don't get that house, not having it like completely wreck you and you never looking at any other houses ever again. So it's this like, holding a butterfly in your hand so nice and gently, because if you like try to squeeze it too hard, you're going to crush it. So understanding that there is rejection and you are going to hear no in all phases of business, and holding space for the grief of that. There's a couple tips I have for you when you are navigating grief through the entrepreneur process. It's a natural part of it. And so having a toolkit of like, okay, these are things that or a toolbox of these are the things that I can pull from when I start to feel grief. The first one is acknowledging your feelings. I remember when I was laid off and I called my coach at the time, she's like, write down everything that you're feeling right now. Cause that was, talk about grief, holy. And that was as an employee. But it was like, oh my God, I had so much of this identity in there. And then it was just like one day ripped from me. And so I encourage you to do the same, is like really leaning into your journaling practice and acknowledging everything, holding space for those emotions, saying like, yeah, I am feeling loss right now. I'm feeling sad. I'm feeling hurt. I'm feeling frustration and all of those different pieces of emotions that you're feeling. Your self-care routine is important during this time. So what are things that nourish you, that get you back to that space, especially if it's like a bigger one. I'm not saying like every time you hear no is your cold calling, then go and like journal your feelings. But if like you have this big deal that's about to sign and it ends up not working, like take the time to like lean into your self-care routine for those things. Connect with other entrepreneurs on that journey, lean into your community, tell them how you're feeling. As I said, this is all such a natural part of this experience. And so there's going to be people being like, oh my God, I remember when that happened to me, or I'm going through the same thing, or, just encouraging words, because then sometimes it's like, yeah, what's the saying? Rejection is actually redirection. And so you may hear people who are like, oh, I had that happen to me. And 3 days later, this is what walked into my life. When I put that community through Mighty Networks down, I was able to lean into this podcast, which has been the best thing I said yes to in 2023. And I had to create space for that to come into my life. And so hearing about other people's journeys throughout this process is everything. And then number 5 is reframing setbacks as opportunities. What can I learn from this? Rejection is redirection. And so get some of those prompts, some of those reframes and use them. Like one no is that much closer to a yes. Like they may seem hokey and kind of like cheesy in the moment, but like they're really impactful and like they're true. And it just takes a little bit of like, okay, I can do this, and reframing what those negative experiences, or what we feel like our negative experiences, actually bring for us. It kind of reminds me of that proverb where I'll have to try to find it, and I'm going to do a horrible job, and I'm going to butcher the shit out of this right now. But it was one of those things where it was like, the old wise man, and someone came to him and was like, oh my God, the world is ending because my cow that provided milk for my family just died. And he was like, okay, maybe. And then the next day the person came back, oh my God, it was actually the best thing because the meat that the cow provided brought in so much money that now I can build my house. And he was like, maybe. And then the next one was like, but building my house was horrible because it lit on fire and this is the worst thing to ever happen. And he was like, maybe. And like, again, I butchered the shit out of that, but it was kind of like when you spiral and get into this is horrible and woe is me, it can take you away from looking for opportunities where this is actually helpful. So I promise that next week will be a little bit more maybe inspiring, a little bit more high vibe, a little bit more tactical about navigating entrepreneurship. I have changed my social media plan and what I am currently doing with it. And I would love to chat with you about how that's working, what I'm doing, how it's allowing me to be on social media less, because that's something I definitely need for my mental health at the moment. So yeah, if you're on Spotify, please leave me a comment and let me know what you thought about today's episode, if you felt grief during the entrepreneur process. And until next time, remember that big dreams and small steps will transform your life.